All right, everybody, it is a bit of a banner day here at Breaking Points because we have live in studio a member of Congress, Congressman Ro Khanna. Welcome back to the show. Great to see you, sir.
I'm honored to be back on. Honored to see how this happens. The set. It's a pretty cool set.
Yeah, being on set here.
A lot of character.
Don't give away too many of the secrets.
The trade secrets, that's right.
Yeah.
So you had an op-ed that caught both of our attention.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. This was in the New York Times. Congressman Khanna taking aim at Joe Biden's inflation policies.
Yep.
The headline here is, there is way more Biden can do to lower prices. And you don't just criticize, you have some specific ideas here that the government could enact, and that the government is basically the only actor who could take charge and have some impact both on gas prices and food prices. Just lay out the case that you're making here, Congressman.
Well, first of all, at a high level, we need an all-out mobilization, not just ad hoc initiatives that are reactive to headlines. Here's what I say on gas prices. The government could actually buy up oil at a reasonably cheap price and then sell it back. Now, oil's at, let's say, 115 bucks. People say, well, what if it goes down to 105? I don't think it's going to go down, but fine. The government takes a loss over the next 3 months. It's much less of a loss than what we're giving Ukraine. On the flip side, you could actually prevent gas from going to $6. So here, now, I'm not saying do this all the time, but in an emergency, do this. You could do the same thing with fuel prices. Those are food prices. Those are two concrete suggestions.
Right, and this is, this isn't price fixing. This is actually straight up within the executive authority. I mean, look, Congressman, here's the question. We've talked about this for months here. We've talked about that SBR. We've talked about the meatpacking industry, agriculture, the executive action. We see today, talking about solar tariffs, and yet we don't see that executive action whenever it comes to the basic bread and butter. So you have more visibility far than us. Why is the administration not doing any of these things?
Saagar, I think that there's this concern that you're intervening with the market and what precedent are you setting. But the reality is people don't want solutions that are a year out or 2 years out. They want to know, how are you going to lower the price of gas? How are you going to lower the price of food? And we have a mechanism actually for doing that in cases of emergency. We're a huge purchaser. We can purchase this stuff and sell it back at a cheap price. I mean, look, commodity traders do it, but they do it at a profit.
Yeah, they do it the other way.
And so the government can do it. So at least acknowledge the government can do it. Now you can say, we aren't going to do it. But here's what you can't say. Well, I'll leave it to the Fed. The government, the president's the most powerful person in the world. They want to see the president and the administration act. Anyone can get elected and say, okay, I want the independence of the Fed. Okay, fine, it's different than Trump. But you don't get elected to say, I'm going to respect the independence of agencies. You get elected to solve problems.
Right. No, I think that's well said. I mean, it's not every day that a critique from a member of Congress from the left is published in the pages of the New York Times. What did the White House have to say about this? Did they reach out to you? Have you seen any receptivity to the ideas?
They did. They were polite. I got to talk to everyone, and they said, oh, innovative ideas. But I don't care whether, I don't need a compliment.
You're not looking for a pat on the back.
I want them to act. And at the very least, direct your agencies. Look, direct the Commodity Future Trading Commission to do an analysis. They could do it in 1 week on what the impact would be of having the government intervene by having purchases in food or fuel markets. And then, the surprising thing is in the Congress, I've had frontliners, moderates actually, come up to me and say, you're right, we've got to do something. I don't agree with all the ideas, 50% I agree with, but you're absolutely right that we have to acknowledge the pain and we have to do something bolder. So you have this odd alliance that the progressives agree with me.
Weird horseshoe going on there.
Yeah,
well,
the frontliners.
That's fine as long as something gets done. I mean, I think my question is, you probably see this. Your district, what's gas in your district? $6.50,
yeah,
something like
$6
that.
when I was there.
Where you're from? That's nuts. I mean, here in D.C., the national average, we're all closing on $5 a gallon. I don't understand why there aren't more Democratic members of Congress who are willing to come out and say there is something that needs to be done. Is there a reluctance amongst your colleagues in order to criticize the administration on this front? Because we just very rarely see dissent. That's why you're here. We very rarely see dissent and even willingness to engage in dissent in good faith.
Sure. I mean, there's always a reluctance to criticize the president of your own party. You want to be in good standing with the president of your own party. But here, I think that my criticism was one with ideas. Sure. I wasn't just saying, okay, you're not doing enough. I was saying, here are things you could do. And I fundamentally think it will be a disaster in November if we aren't seen every day between now and November saying we're going to do these things to lower prices now. look, I've been the biggest proponent on renewable energy and renewable energy spending. That's not going to do stuff in August or September at the pump.
Yeah, that's right.
Speak a little bit more to that in terms of the political landscape. There are some competing analyses, I would say, about why President Biden's approval rating has fallen so far. The group, the age demographic with which he's seen the greatest declines in terms of his approval rating is young people. I mean, at the beginning of the administration, young people were the most enthusiastic about Biden. Now he has his lowest ratings with young people. What do you think has happened? What are the failures that have led to this place? What are the American people feeling that has led them to conclude, like, this is not getting it done for us?
Well, one, I'll give him some benefit of the doubt in that he's genuinely had a tough hand. I mean, when you have a pandemic, when you have inflation, that's tough for any president. And so to have high approval numbers would be hard. But here's where I would say he could do more. He could be more bold. He could be more energetic. He could be more imaginative. He could be more out of the box. And he could look like he's fighting every day and decisive on some issues. I mean, there's no reason we shouldn't have forgiven the student debt. There's no reason that we couldn't have been out there and have gotten some deal on climate by now. There's no reason why every day he shouldn't be pushing and fighting on reducing prices. So I just think there needs to be more energy, decisiveness, creativity out of the administration. I'm not saying that's going to get you up to 50%, but I think that's what people want to see.
One other thing a question I had for you, as someone who does care a lot about the climate crisis, as I do as well, what do you think that the landscape looks like now in terms of climate action? Because you have, first of all, gas, extremely expensive, and you have, of course, the war in Ukraine and the fact that we've cut off access to Russian oil. And so there's this desire to, okay, well, let's get Saudi to pump more. Let's maybe do a deal with Venezuela, which I'm totally open to. Let's try to get the Iranians back in the system as well. But what does all of that mean in terms of the medium to longer term prospects of moving off of fossil fuel?
Well, I think medium to longer term is right. I think what we can't say is, here's our climate plan, and that's going to lower your gas prices tomorrow, because people say, come on, tell us the truth. So we should have a short-term plan on gas prices. Then we should say, look, long-term for price stability, long-term to defeat Russia, Venezuela, Iran, Saudi Arabia, we need to have an alternative. If you want the oil to be worth less, their countries to have less value, then you need to have an alternative. And so a moonshot in renewable energy is in our national security. It's there for long-term price stability. And I think people would get that. Where they get upset is when you have someone saying, well, go get an electric vehicle. And they're like, come on, 3% or something of people have electric vehicles and I'm paying too much at the pump. So
by the way, you can't get them because of the chip issue.
I was going to say,
now,
you can't even buy it if you wanted to. So.
Yeah.
Well, it's the chip issue. It's the fact that we're not mining enough lithium or cobalt. We're not processing that here. We're totally dependent on China and Australia in terms of that production. That's, by the way, one thing that I think could bring this country together in terms of where we have common ground. Bring production back to this country. Have processing of critical materials in this country.
I mean, yeah, but then how does the solar tariff exclusion go through? When clearly someone in the administration is listening to somebody, right? Because you have an executive action that goes through, an extraordinary action. I mean, some people called it illegal, basically circumventing a congressional law that was passed. How does that go through and not a single one of these things goes through? I mean, the baby formula one that you point to is extraordinary. It took, I mean, the administration admitted they've known about this since April, so why did it take until the end of May? I just feel a tremendous sense of malaise, and yet some action on some issues, which I think are extraordinarily detrimental to production. Can you square us that? Like, how does it work in the White House? Because you're going to talk to them any more than, especially our audience. A lot of people ask that question.
Well, we disagree on the solar part, and I think they had to do that, and they combined it with the defense production. But I just want to be
sure.
But the defense production should be fully funded, and even the baby formula, they could be doing a lot more. Look, they're flying things to planes to transport the baby formula. But if you notice, they're not actually buying the baby formula. They could actually buy the baby formula. They could tell the FDA if it's safe enough for European babies, it's safe enough for American babies.
Yes.
They haven't done that. So I think that this is my critique of the administration. I'll probably get calls after this, and that is that there's too much caution. They're not willing to think fully out of the box enough in a crisis. Look, Herbert Hoover had a lot of the ideas that FDR actually took. FDR just came and said, we're going to do it 10 times bigger, and we're going to try stuff, and I don't care if it fails, we'll try something else. And I think in a crisis, you need that approach, and that's what I've been pushing them for.
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't matter, but I'm curious. Do you think that that cautiousness comes from an ideological predisposition? I mean, Biden, throughout his very long career in Washington, has always tried to locate himself in the center of whatever the Democratic Party, spectrum is. Or do you think it comes from a fear of, if we do too much with the government, that's going to give the Republicans a talking point? So like sort of a political fear calculus versus an actual ideological reluctance to use the powers of the federal government?
I think it comes from an ideological bias of neoliberalism. And I throw that word out, meaning that there's just been this view that let markets do their thing and don't interfere. And it means don't interfere when it comes to production. I disagree. The government ought to be helping make sure we have plants and production here in partnership with the private sector. And it says let the prices go up and down. The government shouldn't get in the business of buying. I have never met a constituent in my district who says, I am concerned whether the government's going to do too much or too little on prices. You know what they say? Bring the prices down. And so I agree, we shouldn't have price controls, but we are so reluctant to have the government play a decisive role. And that's, I think, what makes people cautious. There are a lot of economists, friends of mine, who called me up and disagreed with this piece. One person said, who liked my book, said, this isn't one of your better works. So, my guess is there are 100 of those folks who have the president's ear. Yep. So here's the point, though. The president had the guts to overrule the generals in Afghanistan. I supported the president. I think that was a courageous decision. Mm-hmm. I am not Monday morning quarterback. Could it have been done slightly better? Sure, but anyone can say that. That was gutsy. Well, does he have the guts to overrule the conventional economists? Actually, that's harder almost than the generals. But that's what we need in this country. Someone who's going to be decisive on government intervention where it comes to helping the working and middle class.
Yeah, well, it's harder because, as you pointed out, he has an ideological predisposition to not do that. Whereas on Afghanistan, his foreign policy is a real mixed bag over the course of his career. Yeah. But he had some of the right instincts even under the Obama administration. It's really helpful to get some insight from you as to how these debates are unfolding. Also very interesting that there's this sort of weird horseshoe between the centrists who are facing re-election doom and progressives who were saying, come on, let's get this thing together. So really appreciate you taking the time to stop by. Thank you,
sir. Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
Big fan of the show. Thank you.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.